What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma. It's been a while since I did a Borderlands the pre-sequel video, but I did promise you guys a sequel on my Borderlands 2 Legendary tier list, and I figured for today's video that I could rank all 55 of the legendary guns and weapons that can be obtained in Borderlands the pre-sequel. Now, like my last Borderlands Legendary tier list video, this video will be going over guns and weapons only and will include grenade mods. This video will include the DLC Legendaries, and our rankings are going to be based F through S or S through F, with F being the lowest ranked tier and S being the highest ranked tier. Also, since we had a like goal for the last video, let's see if we can reach 2,500 likes. And if we do, I'll make another sequel, and if we don't, you may get punched in the throat at some point in the future. So definitely be sure to smash like to save your Adam's apple. Otherwise, guys, we've got like 55 legendaries to go over here, so let's go ahead and get started with F tier. Now, like the Borderlands 2 version of this vid, F tier consists of legendaries that could be best described as bad. Many of these legendaries either have no or extremely limited redeeming qualities, and they just end up being a pain to actually use. The epitome of this tier is the Rolling Thunder, which, despite explosive weapons being better and worthy of higher tier rankings in the pre-sequel, still just sucks because of its awful rubberized deployment. Adding explosions to that deployment doesn't really make it any better, and really only makes it more likely that you're going to hurt yourself while you're actually using one of these things. After that, we have the Man Lighter, which is a god-awful laser with low fire rate that requires the player to swap weapons to shoot an orb to deal damage. The Thingy, which somehow manages to be the total opposite of most bandit launchers, sporting high ammo consumption, and the Fusillade, which has good fire rate but is utterly ruined by its low base damage. Beyond that, our final two entries for this tier are sort of interesting, but are still terrible, and those are the Nasty Surprise and Four Seasons. The Nasty Surprise is largely unchanged from Borderlands 2, and that you don't have enough child nerves for it to be really viable, while the Four Seasons' random multi-elemental abilities only serve to make the grenade less predictable and less reliable. That and more dedicated legendary elemental grenades deal more damage anyway, so the Four Seasons is more of a novelty than anything else. Overall though, F tier is among the worst as far as the pre-sequel legendaries go. You could do a lot better than any of these, and while I suppose it's not all bad as they can be used as grinder fodder, anything from the foul tier is best avoided. Moving on to our second lowest tier, we have the E or Ew or Yucky Tier. A lot of these legendaries aren't quite as terrible as their F tier counterparts, but by and large, these weapons are still pretty lousy. Just like our Borderlands 2 legendary tier list, the Shred of Fire is pretty lacking since it's still just a better version of a Vladov spinning gun assault rifle that was really never that good in the first place. It actually ends up looking worse in this game, and while that may have made the Shred of Fire worthy of F tier, I decided to keep it E tier because looks aren't everything. There's also the Logans Gun, which is returning to E tier as well, and while it's still a good way to regenerate rocket ammo with an absorption shield, it still is really only able to deal damage while aiming at the enemy's feet, which in my opinion is a deal breaker. The Pyrophobia returns as the Cryophobia, which is largely the same except for its cryo element. There's Sledge's Shotgun, which is returning as the abbreviated Sledge's Shotty, which still lacks the knockback abilities from Borderlands 1. And finally, there's the Pandemic, which largely appears to be unaltered from Borderlands 2, and features its same tier rating thanks to how the homing projectiles are still too slow. That and Pandemics in general are yucky, so it makes sense to put it in the E tier. Like their F tier counterparts, I'd say most E tier legendaries are best avoided. They're better than what's in F tier, but still leave a lot to be desired. And now we arrive at our D or Deficient tier. Unlike previous tiers which contain legendaries that are worthy of mockery, D tier actually has a few legendaries that would actually be pretty good but are held back by some kind of flaw or issue. These flaws can vary, but for the most part, a lot of these would be or are passable legendaries, but they are still just lacking in some way. Probably the most depressing D tier entries to me are both the Magma and Hellfire, since both weapons are some of my favorites from Borderlands 2. Yet they work best in an atmosphere in the pre-sequel, where most of the pre-sequel takes place in a vacuum. As for other D tier entries, you'll probably recognize a lot of them. After all, the Bouncing Bonnie is held back by the additional grenades it deploys, which ends up making it less safe to use. The Mega Nade's triple singularity works, but this design reduces its grenade spam potential, which is really detrimental to any grenade. The Hammerbuster 2 isn't really a worthy successor or pre-successor, since any Jacobs rifle with a projectile multiplier is better. And then there's the ZX-1 and the Omni Cannon, where the former has this really cool projectile homing capability that just gets way out of control and hits walls and the floor a whole lot. And then, of course, you have the Omni Cannon, which has a slow fire rate and makes one wonder just what the point of the small explosive damage portion is really for. After all, just give me a straight Cobra rather than a diluted version. Now, like the Borderlands 2 Legendary tier list, I've decided to also keep the Quasar in D tier as well. As said previously, the Quasar isn't so much bad as it is inferior to other singularity-type grenades in terms of the amount of elemental variety, and because it deals less damage upon detonation than its non-unique counterparts. It maybe is a little more borderline in this game thanks to Athena's Maelstrom mechanics, so feel free to experiment as you may find that you like it more than I do. Ultimately, most D-tier legendaries aren't terrible or anything, but are flawed and may prove to be underpowered compared to other gear that you can find in the pre-sequel. Again, feel free to experiment if you want, but I think you'll agree that most D-tier legendaries are lacking compared to what you can find in C-tier. Speaking of C-tier, we can now talk about C-tier legendaries. Like last time, a lot of these legendaries are actually pretty good, though they do lack a certain greatness or epicness factor that makes them less desirable when compared to other legendaries that will appear in some of the higher tiers. So I suppose in the grander scheme of things, a lot of these legendaries could be considered average, which still means they're pretty good. Some of the legendaries that I would say best exemplify this tier are things like the Major Tom, which is basically just a better looking Varrook, the Leech, which is largely unchanged and returns from Borderlands 2, the Blowfly, which is a reskinned Hornet with warbly projectiles, and of course the Firebee, which also ends up returning from Borderlands 2 and is largely unchanged. A lot of these legendaries didn't really get substantially more powerful, though I suppose the Firebee is a little bit more powerful with Athena's Maelstrom mechanics, but I'd lower the Firebee from its potential for B tier due to the high number of vacuums present within the pre-sequel. That said, there are plenty of legendaries that did get more viable. Case in point, the Striker is a lot better than it was in Borderlands 2 thanks to some of Nisha's skills like Fistful of Bullets, which improves the magazine size, while the Kerboom, aka Kerblaster, benefits from the increased viability of explosive weapons against frozen enemies. There are also quite a few legendaries that got downgraded to C tier from higher tiers. Perhaps the most noteworthy is the Shooterang, formerly known as the Gunnerang, which forgoes its awesome reload damage capabilities in favor of this non-elemental Betty projectiles that it shoots when it's reloaded. Additionally, the reskins of the Botch SMG and Conference Call, which are the Cheat Code and Viral Marketer, are shadows of their former selves thanks to either reduced magazine size or the removal of their special effects and the addition of a fixed element. I also think the transition from Zero's Critical Ascension to Aurelia's I Never Miss ended up making the Invader a little less desirable, as with I Never Miss, you need to be accurate on every shot and not just the subsequent ones in the Invader's burst. As for our last entry that's new to the pre-sequel and is in C tier, I think it's fair to say that the Proletarian Revolution is largely unremarkable. Like some of the other previously mentioned downgraded reskin/revision legendaries, you could argue that the Proletarian Revolution is a downgraded Infinity. However, having infinitely expanding magazine size on a Vladov pistol isn't really detrimental at all. Though I don't think it's insanely beneficial either. So maybe it's fair to put it in the C or average tier. I think you'll find most of what you see in C tier is worth seeking out. However, there are definitely a lot of better legendaries out there, which brings us to B tier. As a general rule, a lot of the legendaries that reside within B tier tend to be better than most of the other legendaries in Borderlands the pre-sequel. However, they tend to lack a certain notoriety or greatness that some of the highly desirable legendaries in both the A and S tiers have. A great example might be something like the Mongol, which was previously C tier on the Borderlands 2 list and is now B tier thanks to the addition of new mechanics. After all, low gravity will allow the player to quickly get far enough away from enemies to benefit from the additional rockets that spawn. There's also something like the Skull Masher, which, like the Striker from C tier, you can fire at a wall, have it ricochet at an enemy while dealing a critical, and then even potentially light them on fire. Even the Zim, which is a reskinned and revisioned variant of the Gub, is improved thanks to how it now deals primarily cryo damage rather than corrosive damage. I also think you'll find some of the new legendaries, whether it be the crazy ricocheting Cat o' Nine Tails, Longest Yard, or the burst fire but low ammo cost Barragan launcher, also end up being pretty good weapons too. And even a few returning legendaries like the Stormfront and the Fatale, or Botch SMG as it's known, are pretty good all around. This said, there is a notable reskin/revision weapon that got downgraded from Borderlands 2 to a lower tier in the pre-sequel. Probably the most noteworthy one is the 88 Fragnum, which was originally S tier's Unkempt Herald. Funnily enough, some pre-release gameplays of the pre-sequel actually included the Unkempt Herald, but after some fan complaints, the Herald was nerfed and we ultimately got the less desirable 88 Fragnum. As a quick aside, be sure to smash like if you'd like to see the Unkempt Herald return in Borderlands 3. Despite some of these guns being ranked from higher to lower tiers between games, this doesn't mean that a lot of these guns are bad or anything, as I think a B tier legendary is still worth using and is definitely worth seeking out. You'll probably get more out of something from the A or Awesome tier, but anything in B tier is generally recommended. Now, you may be surprised to know that despite being a more prestigious tier than B tier, which would imply that a lot of the legendaries that reside within this tier are more exclusive, the A tier is our second largest tier behind the C tier. As for why this happened, I think a lot of it has to do with the pre-sequel's balance, which tends to be a lot better than Borderlands 2's. As far as lasers go, A tier consists of both the Thunderfire and Excalibastard, with both of them being excellent weapons for Athena. And then of course your only other new weapons that you're going to recognize in this tier are the Longnail, which is essentially a Vladof Droog with the ability to bypass shields, and the Turret, which is basically what the Emperor should have been. After that, though, the rest of the legendaries that reside within this tier are ones you probably recognize from Borderlands 2, as the Maggie, Bada Boom, Pitchfork, Nukem, Bonus Package, and Flacker all reside within this tier. Of these six, the Flacker and Nukem in particular function in a very similar way to the Flacker Ahab glitch from Borderlands 2, which would actually make them an S tier combo. But by themselves, they're simply A tier, which still means they're pretty great weapons. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot else to say about A tier. A lot of the legendaries here are awesome and definitely recommended in Borderlands the pre-sequel. So if you are willing to take the time to farm for these, it will be worth it. However, it's now time to discuss the cream of the crop, or the best weapons of their respective types, which reside within the S tier. While this tier isn't going to include 8 legendaries of each weapon type, as I think there are some uniques that beat out legendaries in certain categories, it is going to focus on what I would consider to be the clear bests of the respective weapon types, and consists of 6 legendaries that are not only some of the best legendaries in the pre-sequel, but are also among some of the most powerful weapons in the entire game. Out of all of these, I think it's fair to say that the Luck Cannon is probably the best. When used on Nisha and combined with Tombstone, Hot Lead, Trick Shot, and Fistful of Bullets, the Luck Cannon becomes absolutely monstrous and is capable of easily knocking out anything that's in front of you. All you have to do is just make sure you keep firing in an enemy's general direction and it's gonna die. The same thing goes for the Flare, which is a really good Jacobs shotgun with increased projectile count and better magazine size, which also makes it perfect for bullet spam on Nisha. After that, you have the Absolute Zero, which is the strongest of the Maliwan beam lasers in terms of both base damage and continuous damage bonus. The Laser Disker, which is another laser that has really powerful reload damage thanks to Claptrap's Load and Explode. The IVF, which is an SMG that also has really powerful reload damage on Claptrap. And finally, you have Canada's Laser, which is just a rocket launcher that hits like a truck and can perform criticals, which ends up one-shotting or significantly damaging most frozen enemies. At the end of the day, though, I think you'll agree that all of the S-tier legendaries are amazing and potentially the best of what their respective weapon types have to offer. Some of these are harder to get than others since most are DLC legendaries, but if you're patient, I think you'll agree that the wait was definitely worth it. Alright guys, thank you all for watching, and I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. Remember, be sure to smash like to save your Adam's apple, click the bell to save your larynx, and also so you can be notified when I upload more Borderlands videos. And as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.